Hey guys, so it is 9:20 and I'm about ready to head for bed, but I'm going to be making sourdough bread tomorrow, which means tonight I need to get it out of the refrigerator, feed it so it's ready to go tomorrow morning when we start making our bread, which I'm going to show you how to do. Now, my sourdough starter has been dormant in the refrigerator for at least a month, many weeks, so I'm going to get it out and show you. This is my starter. Now, before you start freaking out thinking, oh my goodness, my starter looks terrible, this is just called the hooch and it's completely normal as long as there's no like black fuzzy mold growing anywhere, which there's not. It's been dormant in the fridge for a while, so it is good. Now, this is perfectly fine to just stir this in if you want. I don't like to do that. Some people say if you do that, it kind of makes it a little bit more sour tasting. I just drain it right off and then I go ahead and feed it. So the longer it sits in the refrigerator, the more black liquid, the hooch is going to be on there. So we're just going to drain this and it'll be perfectly fine, and I'll show you how much it rises tomorrow. So I like to add it to another container, and I love using this one here because I can actually see how far it rises. So I just have my scale here and I'm going to do it in grams. And the reason why you want to do grams is because you can get a more accurate measurement than if you did ounces. So I have some freshly ground whole wheat flour. This is 100% whole wheat starter, so that's just what I'm going to be using. And since I'm making bread, I already have more starter in the fridge that I keep like for waffles and stuff, so I don't need to make it too big. So I think I'm just gonna go ahead and feed it maybe 100 grams of flour, and I do 100% hydration, which means that you do equal amounts of flour and water. So I'm gonna do 100 grams of water. Whoops, I forgot to tear it, but you know, 100 plus 100 is 200, so we're good. So I'm just going to give this a quick stir. Now, some people like to weigh their starter before they add how much flour, and they just base it off of that. I don't do that. I just either go 100 or 200 or 50, however I'm feeling. Okay, so we've got that, and then now I'm going to add my starter in. And it's pretty stiff because it's cold. It's been in the fridge for a while. I lost count how many weeks it's been in there. I know it's been a while. So we're just gonna stir this up until it's nicely incorporated. All right, there you go. So it is actually at the, you probably can't see it, but it's at the 1.5 cup line, and it will be all bubbly and it will rise up, and I'll show you what it looks like in the morning. It is the next morning, and I'm going to start the first process, which is called the auto-lease. So basically we mix the flours and water and let the flour hydrate for an hour before we add our starter. So you can see my starter has really taken off. You can see all those bubbles. It's risen nicely, but we're not going to quite use that yet. Now, the recipe that I'm going to be using is from a couple of cooks. I will link it down below. I'm going to be using their measurements, but I'm going to be doing a little bit different process. So the reason why I like this recipe is because they have everything laid out in a timeline, and this is great for beginners. So I started out with this, but in watching Ellie's Everyday and a couple other sourdough videos, I kind of have the process down, so I don't exactly follow this all. So I'm going to show you what I do, but if you're just a beginner, then you can definitely follow this, and once you kind of get the flow of it and learn how to do it, then you can kind of make your own little twist on it depending on your area, your climate, you know, everything. So again, we're going to use our scale, and we're going to measure out 200 grams of all-purpose flour, 200 grams of bread flour, and 50 grams of whole wheat flour. This is just some freshly ground wheat flour that I stick in my freezer, and 350 grams of water. Now, you might need a little bit more. We live here in Utah where it's really dry. So now we're just going to mix this together. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we want all of the flour mixed in together. In just a minute, Mommy's gonna do it first. My hand wet so it doesn't stick quite as much, and I'm just gonna make sure that I get all the little bits of dough just kind of into a rough shaggy ball of dough. So now I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap and let it sit for an hour, and then we will add our starter to it. So now that it's been an hour, I'm gonna go ahead and add my sourdough starter in. I've got my bowl on the scale here, and I'm going to tear it out so that way it's at 0, and you can see the sourdough starter is nice and bubbly. So I'm gonna go ahead and add 80 grams of starter in there. Now that I've added my 80 grams of starter, I'm gonna get my hand wet so that way it doesn't stick, and I'm just gonna kind of press it in there. It doesn't have to be mixed in perfectly, but I'm just going to mix it in. I can see that my dough is not super sticky, it's not super dry, so I think my ratio of flour and water is good. So we're just gonna kind of mush that in there, and then we're gonna let this sit for 30 minutes before we add the salt in our proofing area. So I'm gonna cover this back up. Excuse my dirty oven, but I don't have a fancy proofing area, so I'm just gonna put it in my oven with the light on, and it'll get nice and warm. So we're gonna let that sit for 30 minutes. So now here is where you wanna feed your starter, and then if you leave it out on the counter, then you're gonna wanna feed it every 24 hours. You gotta do something with it or you're gonna end up with a ton of starter. Or you can just feed it and stick it back in the fridge, which is what I usually do. However, I'm gonna be making another recipe. So I'm gonna go ahead and just take out what I need, and then I'll feed the rest of it and stick it in the fridge. So that's what I need for my roll recipe. And then see how much I have here left. I don't have that much, but no worries, it's perfectly fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick it into my jar here. And you only need a tiny bit. Like, even if you had less than this left, you could still make your starter. So since I don't need a ton of starter right now, I'm gonna go ahead and just feed this with, we're gonna do 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour. And really, you can, I mean, you can do less or more. If I'm making pancakes, I like to build it up a little bit more, so I'll tend to add a little bit more, but this is what I use for my bread. I do have another one in the fridge for specifically for my pancakes and waffles, and I do have a lot more of that in there. So this one I don't need to keep a ton of. Now I'm just gonna stick this straight into the refrigerator. Some people like to let it double and then stick it in. I just stick it in right away, and I've had great success. So we're just gonna go ahead and do that now. It has been 30 minutes and I already, whoa, almost spilled my salt. I have 10 grams of salt here, and I've got my hand wet again, and I'm just gonna sprinkle it on top, and I'm just gonna kind of poke it in there and just kind of mix it up a little bit. Get my hand a little bit more wet so it doesn't stick. Add a little bit more in there and just kind of repeat the process until all my salt is pretty well mixed in. All right, so now we're going to stick this back on here into our proofing area. So I'm gonna put this back in my proofing area for about an hour. My timer has just gone off, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna perform a series of stretch and folds about every hour. So I just get my hand wet so the dough doesn't stick, and I'm just gonna start on one end of it, and I'm gonna pull it up and push it down in the middle. And I'm just gonna go around and do about 4 or so of these, 4 or 5, I don't know. You can see the dough is really resistant, but as we do this, the dough will definitely relax and it'll be really stretchy. And then we're gonna put it back in the oven, and about every hour we're gonna take it out and do that. So I just took this out for our second round of stretch and folds. So we're just gonna repeat the same process. So we're just gonna stick this back in the oven for another hour and do the same process over again. So we are on round number 3 for stretch and folds. I'm still continuing to get my hands wet with a little bit of water. You don't want a ton of water in here because it'll just add more water to your dough. So I just do another one of these and then put it back in the oven for another hour. So you'll know when it's ready, when it kind of is a little bit jiggly and there's some nice bubbles. It's not quite ready, so I'm gonna give it a few more rounds. But as you can see, it's really nice and elastic, and that's what you wanna look for. So you wanna be really gentle so you don't pop any bubbles that have formed already. So I'm gonna do this a few more times. It's almost ready, not quite. So we'll give it one more hour rest and then we'll check, and it might be ready, or we might give it just a little bit longer. So it's looking really good, pretty jiggly. You can see some air bubbles in here. So I'm gonna do it one last time and let it sit for a little bit while I go ahead and make dinner, and then that way I won't have to worry about trying to shape it while I'm making dinner. So you can see how nice and stretchy and elastic, or whatever it is. It's really beautiful dough. So it's nice and jiggly and there's more bubbles on top. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to generously flour my counter. And this is gonna be the pre-shaping. So I'm just going to gently, because you don't wanna deflate it or pop any air bubbles. We're gonna flour a little bit on the top here. And then we're gonna take our bench knife here, which I have available in my Amazon storefront. And what we're going to do, we're gonna flour that so it doesn't stick so much. And we're going to build tension on the top of the dough. I'm not super good at this. It takes a little bit of practice, but you just kind of gently form it into a ball, and you tuck it under and just kind of create that tension on the top. It takes practice. I'm not very good at it, but my loaves still turn out. You can kind of pull it towards you. You need more flour. Just go ahead and put some down. I can see some nice air bubbles, so that'll make for a really good crumb. Once you've kind of gotten it into a tight ball, you're going to put your bowl back over it and let it sit for 30 minutes. So now we're gonna shape the dough. We're gonna sprinkle the top with flour. Before we roll out the dough, we're going to use either a banneton. If you don't have one of these, I just got mine from Amazon, then you can use like a strainer. I've used this before. If I make 2 loaves and I put 1 in each, and this works just as great. But you're gonna want either some sort of a towel or cloth napkin, not a towel like a terry cloth towel, but just a just like a plain piece of cotton. And we're going to generously flour this. If you have rice flour, you can do that, but it's been kind of hard to find rice flour. So I'm just going to make sure that I cover this really good. If you don't cover it good enough, then your dough will stick. Now that that's ready, we can go ahead and shape our dough. So you're going to very gently flip it over, and we're going to pull up one side, and you don't want to push too hard because you don't want to pop any of those beautiful bubbles, and then fold over the other side, and then you're just going to very gently and quickly roll it, and you can kind of pinch closed the ends, tuck them in. I'm not super good at this. And then you're going to put it just face down onto your cloth here, and I'm going to just pick it up and place it right into my banneton, or however you say that, or wherever else, and we'll just wrap the napkin around it. And then you're going to want to cover this with plastic wrap or put it in a Ziploc bag. And then we're going to stick it in the refrigerator for about 24 hours. So it is the next day. It is almost 3 o'clock, and even though it hasn't been a full 24 hours, I'm gonna go ahead and bake it because we're going to be having one of the loaves for dinner tonight. So I have this Dutch oven here. This is the Lodge brand. I will link this down below, and it is a cast iron enamel coated skillet, Dutch oven I believe is what it is, and it does a wonderful job at baking your sourdough bread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to preheat the oven with this in there to 500 degrees for about 30 minutes. And sorry, the lighting's really bad. The sun comes through that back window in the afternoon. So we want to put the cool Dutch oven into the oven right as we turn it on so it doesn't like crack or anything. And we're going to set the timer for 30 minutes because we want to get it nice and good and hot before we put our bread in. So my timer just went off, and I have some parchment paper here. This is unbleached, that's why it's kind of a brownish color. So you're going to remove your bread from the refrigerator, or your dough from the refrigerator, and then you can go ahead and take it off. Ooh, there's a nice little bubble. All right. So you're gonna take it off, and you're gonna gently just put it right under here, and if you floured it enough, then it won't stick. So you're gonna take a sharp knife, or a lame, I think is what it's called, and you're gonna score it. So I like to kind of just score it kind of like this, kind of missed, and then I just do a couple little ones. You can be creative, fancy, whatever. That's just what I like to do. Then we're gonna go ahead and stick it in our Dutch oven very carefully. It's going to be very, very, very hot. Just gonna stick it right in without burning yourself, and then put the lid on. And then you're gonna set your timer for about 25 minutes. Now I've had to kind of play around with this. The recipe originally said 17 minutes, but because mine doesn't go all the way to 5:15, I do a little bit longer. So just kind of play around with it and see. So we're just gonna come back and check on it in 25 minutes. So my timer just went off, and so now I'm going to drop it down to 400 degrees. And this is my absolute favorite part because we get to see it rise, or how much it's risen. So we're going to take the top off. Oh my goodness. Look how beautifully that has rose. Oh my goodness. So you can take it out of the Dutch oven and just put it right on your rack to finish baking, or you can leave it. I'm gonna leave it because I always have a hard time getting it out without burning myself or without ripping the parchment paper. So we're just gonna leave this in here. We're gonna close it up, and we're going to bake it for about another 25 minutes. And again, you can just play around with this until you get the time that you need. So my timer just went off, and I like to use a thermometer to check and see if the bread is done. Now it looks like it's starting to get kind of dark, so I'm just gonna stick that right into the middle. And you want it to be about at least 205. So it looks like it is slowly getting up there. Yeah, that looks about done. So I'm gonna go ahead and take it out. Turned out absolutely beautiful. So we're gonna let this cool for, you want to let it cool at least for 3 hours before you cut into it for best results. Just look how beautiful this is. It is absolutely gorgeous. Enjoyed this video and saw how easy it is to make your very own sourdough loaf of bread. I hope you guys will give this a try. Thanks for watching. Give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time.